talk about how the conservative movement can start getting some wins in the culture. We take a lot of L's, and we've been taking L's for decades in the culture war. The left has the culture in a vice grip. And I'm not saying that we haven't won any victories. We have. And I think we've won some important victories. But we are nowhere near to being dominant, and we are nowhere near to being as competitive as we should be. So I'm going to tell you why this is. I'm going to tell you why conservatives have had trouble winning over the culture. This is not the only reason, but this is one of the main reasons. I would say this might even be like 75 to 80% of the problem. The thing is that one of the worst habits that the right can't seem to shake is the tendency to base its entire platform on opposing the left. So this is a tendency that has allowed the hard left, or not even just the hard left, the left in general. It's enabled the Democrats to label conservatives as reactionaries. You hear this word a lot. You know, the right is full of reactionaries or emotional reactionaries. And unfortunately, there is far too much truth to this contention. There's way too much truth to ignore this accusation out of hand. Some people aren't going to want to hear me say this, but when the left labels the right as reactionaries, they are right. They may exaggerate it, just like they do everything else, but I'm sorry, they are correct. And we always play into their hands when we basically base our opinions on what they're doing. I mean, I'm going to say that again. We always play into their hands when we base our opinions on what the left is doing or what the left is saying. It's almost like we can't look at an issue unless we are doing so through the lens of the left. We look at every issue through the lens of so-called progressivism. It's like we can be presented with an issue. When we're presented with an issue, we say, what does the left think about it? And then we take the polar opposite position without applying any kind of critical thinking, without applying any kind of nuanced thought, without looking at the evidence and following where it leads. We just take our cues from the Democrats and the activist media. Now, I'm not saying we do this literally. I'm not saying that, you know, if you go to the average Republican and say, what do you think about bail reform? They're going to come back and say, well, what do the Democrats say about it? And then form their opinion on that. They don't do that consciously, but that is in effect what we do. Actually, I was just having a conversation over lunch with Ross Schuman, and we're going to be talking about this on my show. And he talked about bail reform and how a lot of Republicans have just this knee-jerk reaction against it, even though it is in line with conservative thought. Now, the thing is, we would get a lot further if we broke this habit. We will get a lot further if we were able to analyze issues independent of what the left thinks. If we can take an issue like, again, example, bail reform, without even focusing on what the left is saying about it, we can take a look at the facts, we can look at the evidence, we can weigh the arguments and follow where that leads, instead of just saying, well, I'm just going to go for the polar opposite of what the left thinks. Okay, well, Democrats came out for not throwing yourself off a cliff. Would you throw yourself off a cliff? I mean, this is something that we made fun of Democrats for when Trump was in office, right? Trump, one of the things you got to give it to Trump. He was one of the few Republicans who was able to turn the left into reactionaries, because they always reacted to what he said or did. They're still doing it. I mean, you saw what Biden did when he first took over. What is it, 94 executive orders now, specifically, and most of which are specifically designed to overturn what Trump did. They made fun of Trump for doing that with Obama, and now they're doing it far more than Trump ever did. But he's the only one that's been able to do that. Trump was not a reactionary. He had his own thoughts on how things should be. He said, we need to do something about immigration, about the economy, trade, China, whatever. And then the Democrats were forced to just respond to what he did instead of using critical thinking and actually forming an actual opinion on it. But that's a digression. Here's the thing. Like I was saying, we're going to get further if we learn how to analyze the issues without focusing on what the left does. Now, I'm talking to rank and file conservatives, but I'm also talking about conservative influencers, commentators, politicians. Even more than that, we need to recognize that if we have an audience, if we influence conservatives, We need to be doing the research. We need to be telling them the truth. We need to be giving them the facts, even facts that may not jibe exactly with what we're saying. And the bottom line is we need to recognize there's something we need to recognize. We need to recognize something that most of us have been missing for decades. And like I said, this is the main reason why we lose. And I tweeted this yesterday. I tweeted, quote, Republicans will start winning more cultural battles when they stop being the opposition and start being the competition. I'm going to say it again. Republicans will start winning more cultural battles when they stop being the opposition and start being the competition. I did another tweet before that. I said, quote, Republicans stay losing because they don't have ideas. They will vigorously oppose what the left proposes without putting forward their own ideas to compete. The left's ideas win out because they have no competition, only opposition. So we may think that we're winning certain victories, but we're not, because all we're doing is opposing anything that the left says. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't oppose what the left says. I'm not saying that we shouldn't debunk the hard left's lies. I'm not saying that we shouldn't argue against their stupid arguments. That's all necessary. But the problem is that we focus far too much on that. And by the way, if you watch my series on the Lily White movement and how the Republican Party lost the black vote, this is exactly why FDR was able to get 70% of the black vote. He offered the New Deal. He offered socialism. And Republicans offered nothing. So even though socialism is a horrible idea, what are people going to choose? They're going to choose the party that actually came with some ideas. And the Republican Party didn't have any ideas for the black community. So the issue here is that conservatives focus more on talking about how the left is wrong about this and about that, without ever offering alternative conservative ideas to combat the foolishness on the left. We don't present a counter argument. We don't present an idea to compete. Now, I'm not saying that this applies to everybody, because there are some commentators who have offered solutions, or they'll say the left is wrong about this subject. Here's what conservatives think, and here's how it will look under conservatism. And again, this tendency shows up in how our influencers and politicians approach everyday issues. They're only focused on talking about how crazy and stupid the left is. Look at AOC, for example. As a matter of fact, let's take climate change, for example. Here's an example. So we're all aware that the Green New Deal is a load of crap. It's an absurd fantasy that would result in bigger and more intrusive government. In fact, we know that the Green New Deal isn't really even about climate change. They said it themselves. So we respond to it by mocking AOC for talking about cow farts and not having airplanes. And I get it. That's worth mockery. But it is very rare. Well, what do you usually not see? You don't see any right-leaning influencer outline a conservative free market solution to preserving the environment. You don't see a lot of people on the right putting forth free market ideas to deal with the issue of climate change. Because a lot of people, I mean, we can disagree, and I'm not an expert on climate change, but we may disagree as to the extent that man contributes to climate change. But most people aren't denying or aren't saying that man doesn't contribute anything to climate change. So if we are contributing something to it, there might be something that we can help to do to deal with it. But it doesn't have to be the government. Now, again, I've heard some people present solutions like that. Ben Shapiro has. He's talked about using different types of energy and how the free market is the best vehicle through which to do that. But in general, we're just saying, oh, the Green New Deal is so stupid. Well, they're going to win. They're going to win that battle. There's a good chance they'll win. Now, they may not, because the American public might just realize on their own that it's stupid. But still, they're going to get at least some of what they want from that Green New Deal, because we're not competing. We're not entering the battlefield of ideas against the Green New Deal. We're just talking about how stupid it is, which, again, we should be doing, but not only. We have to do more than that. Let's talk about critical race theory. So critical race theory is how the far left is proposing to deal with problems like racial inequality and racial disparities between Black Americans and white Americans. And we've responded, and you see the fear over it, right? You see how crazy people are going. Many conservatives are rightly criticizing the ideas that are proposed by the theory. I mean, and they're especially talking about how destructive this can be if it's taught in our children's schools. So I tweeted about this last week when conservatives were pushing for banning the theory. Now, this was the same conversation that we were having back when President Trump banned it at the federal level, and also when it came to working with vendors and also using the theory during diversity training. People were all cheering, oh, it got banned, yay, we won, but we didn't. This was not a good long-term strategy. Biden's already reversed Trump's executive order, so critical race theory is back, right? And here's the thing. What can be banned can just be as easily reinstated once the other party gets back in charge. So when we talk about banning something and only relying on the government, we're talking about band-aids. We're not talking about long-term solutions. These are short-lived fancies that make us feel like we won a battle when we really won nothing. Now, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that concerned parents should not have a say in what is being taught to their kids. I'm a parent, I get that. I'm not encouraging conservative parents not to run for school board or to vote against having CRT in their children's classrooms. The parents should decide what is being taught to their kids. So I'm not saying that people at the local level shouldn't vote to remove that from the curriculum. What I'm saying is that we need to do more than that if we really want to defeat this idea. The way you squash a bad idea is by persuading as many people as possible that your idea is better. But the problem is we don't have any ideas. I mean, here's the thing. If we were to propose an alternative idea or solution on how to deal with racial inequality and racial disparities, we stand a much better chance of winning this battle decisively, a long-term victory instead of just something that makes us feel good. We have a better chance of changing minds. I mean, when we change minds through conversation, persuasion, and competition, then we don't have to worry as much about our policies being overturned, even if the other party takes over. If you make the idea of critical race theory so odious and your idea so attractive, then even if you lose election on the school board, the rank and file, they will be letting them know that, hey, you might be in charge, but you better not put that critical race theory back in there because we will vote you out in a nanosecond. And by the way, I'm just going to put this out there. When it comes to racial issues, which we should be engaging in, pretending that racism is all but dead in America is not presenting a viable alternative solution. Why not present conservative solutions? Now, I'm not saying people haven't come up with conservative solutions, but you're not going to hear any, well, I shouldn't say any. You're not going to hear a lot of right-wing commentators actually presenting solutions. They're just, bashing what the left does. Police brutality is another issue. Anybody can tell that there's an issue with police brutality. But do conservatives promote any solutions? Not many. There are some, but not many. How many influencers have you seen put forth an alternative theory to critical race theory? Pretty much none, which means that even if it's banned at the local level, eventually it's going to come back because the hard left is going to focus on persuasion and shoving this theory down our throats. So yeah, it may be banned in some counties now, but it's going to come back because they're going to change as many minds as possible, and they're going to be dominant because we are not engaging in the battlefield of ideas. We're not debating this the right way. And we need to move from being the opposition that just always says, no, you suck, your ideas suck. We need to move from that to saying, you suck, and here's our idea that's much better than yours. That it's not hard, but we don't do it. We always miss it. And the left benefits from that. And I always see people talking about Chloe Valdery, and I'm going to use her as an example. Here's a theory. Now, she has the theory of enchantment. And I'm not saying that I'm co-signing this theory just yet because I don't know enough about it. But at first glance, it seems like something that might work a lot better than what the left is suggesting. And by the way, she does not believe in critical race theory. She has spoken out against critical race theory. I'm not sure where she lies on the political spectrum. I don't know if she leans more left or more right or whatever, but she has an idea and it's worth exploring. So I'm going to put that up right now. This is from a TED Talk that she did. And it's a virtual TED Talk, but the TED Talk nonetheless. And here we go. I'm just going to play just a little part of this.
Now, there are three principles that are really the guideposts for the theory of enchantment, and it's important to understand them because I think that they will be useful in helping us heal our nation in this moment that we're dealing with racism and police brutality, and really needing to advance towards social justice and social change. So the three principles are very simple, and they are as follows. Number one, treat people like human beings, not like political abstractions. Number two, if you want to criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And number three, try to root everything you do in love and compassion. Now, you can imagine, even if we as a nation were to implement the first principle, to try to live out that practice in our everyday lives, we would come so far. But we're not doing that at the moment. At the moment, we are prejudging people and treating people not like human beings, but instead like abstractions. We're caricaturing one another, we're stereotyping and reducing one another, and in the process, we're stereotyping and reducing ourselves. So I think that if we were able to internalize and implement all three principles of the theory of enchantment, we could foster better conversations that can help heal our nation and help us move forward. Thanks so much.
All right. So what do y'all think? I mean, those three principles, I wrote them down, so I'm gonna repeat them really quick. The theory of enchantment, the three principles are treat people as human beings and not as political abstractions. If you want to criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And three, try to root everything you do in love and compassion. Now, I'm sure you'll agree with me when I say that most people would think that sounds a lot better than saying everybody's racist who doesn't agree with the left. I mean, because that's essentially what critical race theory is. It's saying that racism is dominant in every single American institution and that race is the center of everything that this country was built on. I'm paraphrasing. It's more nuanced than that. But still, that is essentially their point. Which do you think is going to sound better to people? What Chloe said or what the critical race theorists say? This could be an idea maybe that we can promote rather than just not engaging in the conversation and talking about how horrible critical race theory is. And again, I'm not co-signing this just yet. I need to learn more about it. I'm hoping to interview her and so that she can give me more insight. But even just that little section, that sounds good. If that's really what we're talking about here, that is much better. That's a much better way to deal with issues that talk about race and racism. And I think that could be a much better solution than relying on something that really is intended to divide. Honestly, I think that critical race theory is a divisive theory, and I think it's being used as such deliberately. But the bottom line is, whether it's the theory of enchantment or something else, we need to come to the table with a better idea. And like I said, pretending that racism doesn't exist or that it's on life support, that's not the answer, because that is very clearly not true. And it's okay to say that. Like I always tell conservatives, acknowledging that racism has an impact is not going to turn you into Al Sharpton. See, the far left, they exaggerate racism and they make it seem as if, I always use this example, they always make it seem like there's a Klansman waiting behind every tree to lynch a black dude. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but they do. They exaggerate the impact of racism. But on the right, they take the polar opposite view because they didn't come up with their own opinions on this. They just reacted to what the left did, which means that we don't have the chance to be the adults in the room and say, hey, racism does have an impact. It may not be as crazy as what AOC says it is, but what are the conservative solutions to that? What is the conservative answer to racial disparities? How would a conservative reverse the impact of redlining or of Jim Crow or of other racist policies that the government imposed that still have an effect today, even though they've been outlawed? What do we do about it? That's the conversation that we need to be having. When we have that conversation and we come up with solutions, now we're in the battlefield of ideas and we're becoming competition and not just opposition. We need to compete, not just oppose. If we only oppose, then we're not going to get the sale. I mean, my background is in sales. So all of my mentors in the world of sales, they told me, when you're trying to get a new prospect and they're already buying from the competition, the solution isn't to bash the competition. As a matter of fact, in that case, you want to acknowledge the good things about your competition and then sell your product and convince the customer that your product is better. You need to focus more on the benefits you bring to the table more than you do on why the competition sucks. The same principle applies here in politics. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't call out the bad stuff on the left, but if that's all we're doing, we deserve to lose the culture war. We don't deserve to have a place in the culture war. Frankly, we're not going to make any inroads, and that's just the way people work. So, just wanted to leave you with that. I'll be talking more about this, but again, we're not going to get anywhere unless we move from becoming the party of opposition to the party of competition.